This is PIX on Politics Daily with Dan Mannarino.
All right, everybody, hello. Welcome to the first ever PIX on Politics Daily. We're going to call it Pop Daily with myself. I'm Dan Mannarino, so host and managing editor of PIX on Politics, which usually airs Friday nights, Sunday mornings, 6:30 p.m. and 7:30 a.m. But the goal of this, what we're doing daily, is to have a more fluid conversation with policymakers, newsmakers, so on and so forth, that are impacting your daily lives. So we're going to kick things off today with a really important conversation, right? Because I hear from so many of you out there each and every single day, and a lot surrounds the conversation of public safety, but more importantly, zeroing in on what plays out on the subway system, since so many of you are mass transit riders, right? And what can be done to change the perception that the subways aren't safe, but also the reality that they may not be safe when you take a look at some of the numbers. So let me bring in our first guest here on PIX on Politics Daily, Liz Glazer. She's the founder of Vital City. Hey, Liz, how you doing?
Great. Congratulations on Pop Daily. I love it.
I'm glad that thank you very much. And I'm glad you're the first guest. You know, I wanted to talk to you in particular because I read this study that you guys put out over at Vital City. And for those who are tuning in right now who may not know what Vital City is, you really are looking to improve life by finding ideas, doing the research, and then passing it along to shape urban policy. The question I have for you first and foremost, when you take a look at this subway safety study that you guys just recently did, is anybody looking at this, reading it, and then changing policy, right? And making people feel safe before we get into the actual findings?
Yeah, well, that's the $64,000 question, Dan. And we do think it's landing with some impact. So we've seen the governor adopt some of our language and some of our main recommendations. We've seen several mayoral candidates cite to our stuff, including Governor Cuomo, who drew heavily from our plan for his subway safety plan. We obviously spoke to the MTA and the police department beforehand, and I think broadly, they feel that these are helpful recommendations. Our point is not to knock folks. There's a ton of work going on, but to figure out, is there a way to distill it and to make it concrete and to really have punch?
Yeah, you know, and so when I kind of broke it down into the good, the bad, and the ugly from reading the details of the study, right? And what I found most fascinating was that the subway system was safer in 2024 than it was in 2023, but less safe than it was in, say, 2019 and 2009. But when you talk to a New Yorker in 2024, they're going to say that the subways feel less safe today than in previous years. So kind of talk me through some of the numbers and how you kind of came out with that outcome.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing to say, especially in light of the Trump assault last week on the subways, threatening to take away billions of dollars, is that the reality is that subway crime is incredibly rare. Violent crime is like 1 in a million, murders are 1 in 330 million rides. But subways are incredibly personal to us. Every New Yorker takes it every day, and every New Yorker has a story. And the nature of the confined quarters and the mobility and cell phones and everything else makes it very rare, and they're very real. But there is something going on that our report points out that we think may be behind why people are feeling kind of jittery and feeling more unsafe. And what's going on is that the kind of violence that's happening underground has really flipped. It used to be that robberies, stick-ups, muggings, that's what drove crime. And that's kind of predictable. People are going where the money is. You know what to do with respect to enforcement. You know who the guys are. What's now happening, and we're seeing this sharp rise that's actually been going on for some decades, is that it's the impulsive violence that's happening.
The push.
The push, the shove, and that is being fueled by a different kind of motivation. It's animus. And when we look at kind of at studies of who it is who's arrested most often for those kinds of violent crimes, we do see an overwhelming percentage who have a history of mental illness or homelessness. And that's much, much harder to predict and to prevent.
Well, and to your point, Liz, it's so fascinating too, because my mother was a subway rider in the 70s and 80s, and she would talk about how if somebody was going to attack her for a robbery, she knew it was for the money and not necessarily for her to injure her. They just wanted the money, right? But and this is kind of where I break it down. So the good was the overall safety argument, then you break it down into the bad. And you guys had in your report that since 2019, violent recidivism has risen among subway offenders, doubling from 3% to 6%. So who is in that recidivism category that's committing a crime and then putting back onto the streets?
Yeah, so it's the people who are committing these impulsive crimes.
The same ones.
The assault, over and over again. And that's very hard. So, do the police know by name who some of those people are? Yes. Can they figure out when that's going to happen next? No, that's really hard. And it's not simply a police issue, right? If you're talking about people who are struggling with a whole array of other challenges, there are many other ways to address that, and that need to be addressed. Preventive stuff like the outreach teams that are now going on, but there needs to be some higher level of focus, information, and coordination. So many people are involved underground. There's so much effort from the state, from the city, from enforcement, from nonprofits, but having kind of a traffic controller who's able to bring all those pieces together with real focus is an important piece.
Yeah, let me ask you a question about who, I guess, is committing the crime. And it kind of brings me down to the ugly, because it was individuals with a violent subway arrest have more extensive criminal history than those arrested for violent street crime. So how did you kind of look at that and make that determination and what was happening above ground to what's happening underground?
Yeah, so we are seeing above ground a very similar kind of flip, meaning a big rise in assaults that's been occurring over decades. Okay. It's just much more concentrated underground, and the nature of the way subways work mean that the kinds of things that are very effective above ground, hotspot policing, are harder below ground. So you're never going to have precision policing, for example, below ground, because it's so dispersed, because it's so rare. You're always going to have more police than necessarily you might have need, as a ratio above ground. And the same thing goes for services. You're always going to have more effort, more touches than you might think in order to have some effect.
So it's interesting. As I talked to the mayoral candidates along the way, and you mentioned Governor Cuomo taking this report and kind of putting out his own policy for his candidacy, a lot of folks, or a few of them, have kind of said broken windows policing may be the way to go. And it kind of brought me to the last couple pages of the study, which looked at disorderly conduct, fare beating, and how that correlates to violent crime. So tell me a little bit about what you found when it came to something like fare beating, and if that was actually leading to a more violent crime.
Yeah, so I think, the big news, which I think a lot of people have known for a long time, is that fare beating is important for a ton of reasons. It's important because it knocks a big hole in the revenue of the MTA. It's important because it kind of signals to people that, the unfairness, the kind of disorder problem of some people paying and some not. But fare beating is not important as a predictor of violence. And so what we say in our report is that there are a million reasons why fare beating is something to be addressed. Violent crime is not one of them.
So when you guys finished the report, and by the way, how long did it take you to do?
It took us about 3 or 4 months, but partly because some of this was new stuff, and some of this was just getting the greatest minds in the land and distilling what they knew, whether they had been in the police department or nonprofits or researchers or others.
So do you take the report, and obviously you give it to the players, but unlike some other reports I have read, you stop short of making recommendations. Now, is there a reason you don't make the recommendation of like, hey, this is what we should do or shouldn't do? Or it's kind of you want to hear them and their ideas?
Well, we do actually have recommendations. So we have sort of 5 main ones, and 2 of them are all about governance. And the first one is make it clear that subways are for transit. If that is the goal, everything slots in after it. Police know what to do, riders know what to do, outreach workers know what to do. If subways are for transit, they're not a dwelling, etc.
Okay.
The second thing that we talk about is have this kind of unified command that brings together the many, many players who are doing so much work underground in order to have kind of a unified approach. And then we talk about what actually should policing look like, what should we do with the physical environment, which is a huge moderator of behavior underground.
Yeah. You know, in terms of the policing, Liz, I know we're almost out of time. In terms of the policing, do you talk to the New Yorkers themselves and the riders about whether or not, because that's a big part of the conversation I'm sure you hear, is we don't want more police, or we don't want the National Guard down on the subways because that doesn't really do much.
Yeah. So I think that's a huge piece of it, right?
Yeah.
You know, do you actually undermine your credibility by surging with National Guardsmen, you know, and people are sort of scratching their heads wondering what they're doing underneath. And one of our recommendations is don't have these big surges. The point is to have a kind of staffing model in which you actually reflect day to day what's going on. So you don't need the surge and you're not pulling cops, for example, from above ground, below ground, and that you have people who are actually trained to do what is pretty particular kind of policing when it comes to underground.
Fascinating. Liz, I urge people to go to the website, Vital City, read the actual study that you guys did. Any sneak peek on what you're working on next?
Absolutely. We're looking at public places in disorder. So stay tuned.
Come on back, okay? Because you're fascinating. I got to have more conversation with you, Liz. Good to see you.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. Really appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk soon. All right. And so that's just scratching the surface, everybody, okay? So make sure you go and read the report, Subway Safety on Vital City. They have other things on their website that are just fascinating to read in terms of shaping the narrative and really shifting public policy and things that really matter most to you. But those are the kind of conversations we're going to have, taking something like one topic, breaking it down in a way that's really easy for you to understand. And I want to hear from you as well. So shoot me an email, dan@pix11.com, shout me out on Instagram, X, whatever you do want to do. Let me know what you want me to talk to anybody about regarding your life in the tri-state area, okay? That's going to do it for the first episode of PIX on Politics Daily, airing right here on PIX 11+. See you tomorrow.